Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to shop. I'm glad you decided to stop by and spend a few minutes with me here. I want to talk to you about something that I think is really important that I haven't heard any other preppers really talk about. And I learned this from watching the show alone. My wife and I, we're trying to be preppers to the best of our ability and getting everything we can together so that we'll be able to survive and thrive during an economic collapse or, just a complete collapse of everything, which is what a lot of people think is coming, and I am one of them. You just can't go on forever printing out money like monopoly money and just passing it out all around the world and not expect things here at home to go bad. And they are going bad. You can look at the gas prices, you can look at the food prices. So people that have already stocked up on this stuff have a pretty big advantage over people that are just getting started now. So this topic we're going to discuss today is really for advanced preppers. I don't think that this is something that when you're first getting into prepping, you don't need to worry about this. You need to worry about canned goods and, getting several months worth of food stored up, dried beans, dried rice, things like that, learning about how things store, what things are going to store the best. So that's the people that are just getting in, just breaking into the prepping game. This is for people like my wife and myself that we've been prepping since the Obama years because we saw the writing on the wall way back then, although I'll admit we have cranked it up to like level 10 since Biden took office because just as we predicted, when you elect a communist and they implement communist policies and globalist policies all around the country, that has long-lasting repercussions. And some people are arguing that the United States will never recover from that last bad election. That's all I can say about that. So I wanted to read this to you because I'm not going to read every single sentence in this thing because it's a 7-page article here. I want you to go read it for yourself. I found a killer article here on the internet that covers all of the stuff I've been thinking about. My wife and I, during the winter months, when we don't have as much outdoor work going on, if it's summertime or springtime or whatever, my wife and I are usually working from sun up to sundown, and then we eat late and go to bed late and all that stuff just so we can get everything done, right? But in the wintertime, we have a little more downtime. So during those times, we like to still learn new things and look at new, different shows that we haven't seen before, right? And we found this show called Alone. It is the best survivalist show of that type that I've ever seen. And we used to watch Dual Survivor. We used to watch Life Below Zero in Alaska. And a lot of those, that they had some good points to those shows, but they seemed, kind of contrived, kind of like the Bear Grylls show. When it came out years ago that Bear Grylls actually had like a really nice swanky apartment he was staying the night in, and he was just pretending to be out there doing this survival. Well, these people are really surviving. They're dropping them off in remote locations, usually in Canada or Alaska, places like that with colder climates are the ones that I've seen. And the show is excellent. And one of the things that is great about it, obviously it's the shelter, seeing how people, deal with different shelters and things like that, which is important to your survival. But one of the things that I never saw coming, that this show illustrated, almost every single person that came on to compete on this show suffered from the same problem long term. It's not short term. It doesn't happen right away. When you first get off the plane or the helicopter, I mean, you're ready. You're full of energy. You're ready to go, and you've got lots of energy to build your shelter and do all these things. But about week 6 or 7 or 8, people started losing weight consistently, and lots of weight, and they were always running up against the wall of, if they lose too much weight, the medical team was going to come and say, hey, you've lost too much percentage of your body fat, so we're going to have to pull you out for medical reasons. And that meant they lost the show, right? Whatever prize money or awards that came along with winning the show, just the bragging rights. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? So anyways, a great show. I highly recommend you guys go watch it. But what was the number one thing that these people all butted their heads against the wall on? It was getting enough fat. Usually there was an abundance of rabbits and other game, small game like that. In one of the shows, I saw a guy early on, he killed like a muskox or something, a great big animal, like the size of a buffalo, right? Maybe it was some kind of buffalo, I don't remember, but it was a huge animal, bigger than a normal cow. And he kills this thing with like a bow and arrow or something. And I had my doubts when he took the shot because this thing looked like it had pretty tough hide. But anyways, the guy killed it, long story short. And he knew how to process it because he was a survivalist, you know. So he built a tripod system up in the trees so that he could get up there and store all his meat, keep it away from the bears and other game that were interested down on the ground level. But what he didn't anticipate was that the badgers came in, I believe it was badgers, and came in and ate all of the fat. They didn't eat the meat, they ate the fat. And he was worried because he had all this red meat, but he knew that you can't just eat pure red meat that's very lean, or else you'll end up with protein starvation. That's not a thing you want to go through. It's a bad deal, sometimes called rabbit starvation. So I came across this excellent article on SHTF blog. I highly recommend you guys go read this for yourself, or go click on it in a second window and open it up, and we'll read it together as we go through here. But this article illustrated many different reasons that you need to have the fat, but also some different ways to store this fat. So let's get into this. Where to find fat in a survival situation. And this is from the SHTF blog. And why do we need fat for survival, you might ask? Well, while we do get calories and nutrients from all food, our bodies wouldn't be able to utilize them without the help of fats. Fats also have multiple properties that enable our bodies to function the way they do. There's only a limited amount of time we can go without fat before our bodies shut down. So much like, 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, there's a certain point your body is going to hit a wall. And without fats being put in there, you're going to have all kinds of problems. Fats are known for being a source of energy, storing energy, being essential for growth, development, and cell functions, maintaining healthy skin and tissues. That's going to be a huge one, especially in a survival situation. Transporting fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, and E, and K to your bloodstream, through your body, and getting it where it needs to go. And forming steroid hormones. So all of that stuff sounds like it's pretty important. And these might be reasons if you don't have any fat in your prepper pantry right now, you definitely need to be thinking about this. So it's important to know the function of fat because many preppers will assume that if they eat enough wild game, that they could survive indefinitely. Wild game happens to be very lean in fat content, and while you might not be hungry, your body will still consume itself if it lacks fat that it needs to survive. So I've heard this over and over and over from preppers, especially young bloods that are just getting into it, and they're like, I'm not going to worry about stocking up. When the SHTF happens, I'm going to go out into the countryside and I'm just going to kill me a deer, or I'm going to kill me a squirrel, or I'm going to kill me a this or that, or a rabbit, or anything that moves, they're going to kill it and eat it, right? And that may be okay in the short term, but eventually there's not going to be any animals left. If you think about the amount of people in these cities, even if a small percentage of these people did that, that's going to decimate the wildlife population in the United States. Almost overnight. As soon as people make that shift in their mind that they're going hunting and they're just going to go out and get whatever they want. For one thing, many people don't realize, but the act of hunting and doing things takes a great deal of energy to go and do that sort of stuff. So unless you have some snare traps and different things like that you've already set out, then the actual activity of hunting itself can be a real energy draining situation. And it's sort of like fishing. Sometimes you catch a lot of fish, sometimes you catch no fish, but you still have to, put the energy out there one way or the other. So what are you going to do when all of a sudden there are no animals left around? And that includes cats and dogs and other things like that people wouldn't normally eat right now, because in desperation, people start eating things, obviously, that they wouldn't eat. Beware of rabbit starvation, and that's protein poisoning. Ever hear of rabbit starvation? I'm not talking about starving rabbits. I'm talking about starving from rabbits. Rabbit starvation is also known as protein poisoning, and it's a dangerous health condition caused by eating too much protein coupled with too little fat. The thinking here is that getting almost all of your calories from lean protein alone may disrupt the liver's ability to process protein. So you don't want to be feeling full and feeling like you're well nourished and actually be suffering from malnutrition. So These are things we don't really think about a lot now because we eat this store-bought food. So we try, most people try to cut fat out of their diet. And in the society we live in now, that may be fine. But in a time where you can't get any fat, that could be deadly. And so where to find fat in a survival situation? So in order to find enough fat to survive, you're going to need to rely on knowledge and creativity you have. There are many ways to fulfill your body's needs that you wouldn't normally think of from natural and man-made sources. So let's go over a few of these man-made fat sources here. Again, I don't want to make too long of a video on this. I just want to pique your curiosity. Hopefully, when you see this, you'll go out and read this article and you'll glean the knowledge that I have gleaned from it, because it's very important stuff that, again, I wasn't thinking about this until last winter when we were watching the show alone, and I was like, that's something we haven't really covered. We have some fat, some of this stuff we already have on hand, but this article gives us some great pointers here. Okay, so the first one here, it's olive oil. It's more expensive than lard or shortening, but it makes up for it in its fat content and health benefits. At 14 grams of fat per tablespoon, olive oil is a great choice to stockpile. Normally we use olive oil solely for cooking. You can also cut right to the chase and chug it straight from the container. Of course, that's, in desperate situations. So maybe you just had a big rabbit dinner because that's what your survival plan was, is to eat your own rabbits that you raise, your domesticated rabbits that you're growing to eat. But you could maybe chug a little bit of olive oil, or another thing you could do is pour some over the top of the rabbit. It would probably taste delicious. So when looking at health benefits of this oil, it has anti-inflammatory properties, high amount of antioxidants, and monosaturated fats. You can also store this oil longer than most natural fat sources, even up to a few years, as long as it's packaged and stored correctly. Next up, instant formula, baby food. As weird as it may sound, infant formula can be a good food source in a survival situation. If you think about it, it contains everything needed for a newborn's rapid growth. We never outgrow the need for those nutrients. When the food is hard to find, it can pay off big time to have something that has everything you need in it in one small package. A single scoop of powder can get you 2.5 grams of fat, which you can incorporate into any drink or food. This is a perfect example of how thinking outside the box can help you find resources from uncommon sources. So again, powdered baby food, instant formula. If stored in the right conditions, that stuff's probably a lifetime product. Look that up, do your own research on that. But I'm assuming since it's a powdered resource that's been packaged and probably doesn't have much or any oxygen inside of it, it probably lasts almost forever. So it might be a thing to do when you're at the store next time, even if you don't have small kids, to pick up some instant formula. And also an added bonus, what if you're living through the SHTF and maybe your daughter moves in back home with you because your son or whatever, and they bring their partner with them and they suddenly have a baby. If you've got some instant formula on hand, anyone around that has a baby is going to want to trade with you. So not only could it save your life, it could be a great bartering thing in the future. Peanut butter. 16 grams of fat for every 2 tablespoons makes peanut butter an ideal choice for your dietary fat needs. It's also shelf stable, and in powdered forms, it can be kept upwards to 5 to 10 years. Peanut butter is also delicious. And it won't take much more than a spoon to get those precious nutrients in your body. Even though there can be a lot of sugar and preservatives, peanut butter does have its health benefits. It's a good source of protein, minerals, vitamins, and can help you keep a healthy heart. There are many ways to get the nutrients we need. It all takes some research and experimenting. Some other products you can consider for their fat content are Ensure meal replacements, like the Ensure, those little jugs that have like a little chocolate shake or whatever it is, canned foods, and chocolate. These are all things that, for one thing, if you hadn't seen or had any chocolate in like, say, 6 or 8 months or something, and somebody busted out a chocolate bar, my wife and I were just talking about this a couple of nights ago, how in this civilization we live in now, our sugar threshold is set way, way high, right? So most of us like really, really sweet things and things like that. But for me personally, I don't like things that are over the top sweet. Like when I eat like a chocolate cake or something like that at somebody's birthday party, it's oftentimes too sweet for me, for my taste buds. It's just over the top. So the point there is that as you go along and have less and less sweet stuff, things that you maybe can turn your nose up at right now, like the sweetness from fruits and things like that, or like corn, sweet corn. If you hadn't had processed sugar in a very long time, those types of things, they taste so delicious, and it kind of resets your taste buds. So next up, we're going to talk about natural fat sources. While it can be a more difficult place to obtain fats naturally, nature can provide you everything you need if you're smart and lucky. All you need to do is figure out how to take advantage of what's all around you. So the biggest challenge to obtaining fats from nature is not knowing where to get them. I consider fatty products from domesticated animals natural sources as well, since the plants and animals would still produce them without human intervention. Just be vigilant on the quality as time goes on. Unprocessed fat is not known for its longevity. It will eventually go bad. Even if you freeze it, you will eventually have to look for fresh sources. So here's a list of natural resources where you can get the necessary fats from. Fish, number one. I mean, amazing source of fats. Lots of fat in most every fish. And instead of discarding that in a survival situation, you'd probably want to cook that up and eat it along with the meat. Nuts, next up. So that's another thing you can stock up on right now. Those jarred peanuts, they'll last a long time. I'm not sure how long. Probably 3 to 5 years, I would say, if they're stored in the proper conditions. And I'm just guessing on that. Go do your own research on this before you trust me on this. It's just, I'm spitballing from what we have done in the past that has worked out for us. Your mileage may vary. It depends on, everything depends on the conditions you keep this stuff in. Fruits, whole milk, eggs. And another thing, they didn't really mention this here, but one of the things you can do is powdered milk. They talked about formula for babies, but also powdered milk. I'm sure it's going to, especially if you get the whole kind of powdered milk that has the fats in it. I don't know though. They may take a lot of the fats out of that so they can powder it up easier. Let me know down in the comments. But I know for sure we've got several of these boxes of powdered milk. That way, you know, if one day the milk dries up and we can't go to the store and get it, we'll have some way to get some milk in our body. Eggs. My wife and I, we have 6 hens and 2 roosters, although we were supposed to cull one of those roosters and we're still considering it because right now he's just eating our food. But a daily source of eggs is very important. Chickens is the gateway animal to get you into doing livestock and being truly more self-sufficient than you are now. Again, I wouldn't want to just live off of eggs. I think the variety is not only the spice of life, it's good for your body to have some variety. But the way things are structured right now, as long as I can feed and water my chickens, my wife and I are guaranteed enough eggs off of our 6 hens that we would not starve, just off of that. And we're usually, right now, we're selling a lot of our excess eggs and things like that because we can't go through them fast enough. My wife was doing egg glassing, which is where maybe I'll make a standalone video about that. But it's basically you use, I believe, lime and water. I'm not sure if you have to use boiled or distilled water to do this, but you basically put the eggs in there with this lime and it preserves the eggs almost indefinitely. Again, it all depends on how you store it. You got to keep things dry, cool, out of the sunlight. Usually that's the best way to go. Let's talk about wild animal fats for survival. So what happens when you can't bug out to a homestead or a farm? Without access to domesticated animals, you will have to rely solely on wild game to obtain fat and protein. One issue with this is most wild animals, as mentioned, are very lean. And it's because of the nature of being a wild animal. I mean, you're always roaming, hunting, looking for whatever the food is that you're going to eat. But no matter how many animals you harvest, you'll likely have to supplement extra fat into your diet. But where it gets interesting is at the time of the year where we need fats the most, wild animals happen to have the highest amounts, making it easier for us potentially by decreasing the amount of animals that we would have to need to harvest. So in the wintertime, animals put on fat. When you harvest them in the wintertime, they're going to be much fatter than if you harvest them in the summertime. Yet there are a few animals and animal parts that a few people even know they can utilize as a source of fat. Some include squirrel fat. And I would have been like, what? Who would have thought a little bitty, tree rat would actually provide you with a lot of fat? But this guy, he says, yeah, I thought it was weird too until I found this article on how to render squirrel fat. While squirrels are small, there are a lot of them. And even if you only get a little fat from each one, it can quickly add up, especially if you know how to preserve that fat. So squirrels can contain an average of 2.7 grams of fat for 3 ounces. And personally, I've never eaten squirrel, but everyone I ever talked to that has eaten squirrel always say they're greasy. And it's because they have 2.7 grams of fat in every 3 ounces of meat. So, I mean, that's a pretty high ratio. This means a 1 pound squirrel would have 13.5 grams of fat. And you need to know how to render that and use that fat. So that's just an average, obviously. I mean, you know, your mileage may vary. If you got real skinny tree squirrels, then they're not going to have as much fat, obviously. And probably the same thing would apply if you kill them in the summertime. They're not going to be as fatty as they would during the wintertime. Beaver fat. I know, go ahead. Get the jokes out right now. This is an old mountain man favorite. There are stories of rendezvous where old beaver trappers would take the tails of trapped beavers and roast them over a fire, and then they would eat away the layers of fat under the thick skin. It's hard to say just how much beaver fat there is in a tail, but especially because people don't typically eat the tails. But what I can say is that because the beaver size and the fat content, they can be a potent food source to trap for survival scenarios. So if you have some beaver traps set out, you're probably going to make it because beavers contain a high amount of fat and oils and things like that. And then the last one here is called caul fat, C-A-U-L, fat. Caul fat is a thin membrane that surrounds the stomach and other organs of hooved animals, including deers, pigs, cows, and sheep. It is also known as lace fat because of its web-like appearance. So if you've ever cleaned an animal, especially a hooved animal, or been around it, or even watched a video on it, you'll see these like ribbon looking things that run around like a web that runs around the stomach. That's all fat. And according to this guy, he goes on and on about it. We're not going to read all about that, but he's talking about how great it is. It's like the best tasting fat there is, he says, and you can go over to your butcher and get some of that if you don't clean your own animals. But if you do clean your own animals, especially in a SHTF situation, you need to know how to use this stuff. So last thing we're going to talk about here is how to store fats. So it's always a good idea to stockpile resources, and since fat is so critical to your health, it should be a priority to have the ability to extend the shelf life of any fats that you come across. So you need to know how to do this. Number one, keep away from light, heat, and oxygen. So again, dry, cool, and dark. That's what you want to think about when you're storing almost all of your foods. Solid fats keep much longer. So again, like your lards and your different things like that, your Criscos and things like that are probably going to store a lot longer than your liquid, like vegetable oils and things of that nature. Don't stockpile more than you can use, though, because it will go bad. And it says even well-packaged fat can go rancid quickly in certain conditions, often without any evidence that it's gone bad. Now, I don't know what the health consequences would be of eating bad fat that went bad as it was stored. So they don't really talk about that in here. You may want to do your own research on that. And when you put fat away, it's definitely a good idea. Anytime my wife and I put food away, especially canned foods and fats and other things like that, we write the date of purchase. When the day we're putting it away, we take a Sharpie or a magic marker and write that on the lid or the side of the box or whatever, so that we'll know how old that stuff is. That helps us. That's the number one way that we're able to rotate our food and keep our rotation as fresh as possible. And I highly recommend you do that. Anything that you bring into your prepper inventory, take a little Sharpie and just write on the top of it the date that you're putting it away. And even if you turn the can over and the date, might say best by, 2022, whatever, but you bought the stuff in like 2019, and the point is if you've stored it the right way in a cool climate where it's not getting too hot inside of the room or whatever, this stuff will last a long time. But you don't want to stockpile more than you can use. And that goes across the board for any food. Don't waste your money. Use that precious resource, money, to buy the most long-lasting things, especially on the big items that you're going to stock up on to the ceiling, like beans and rice and things like that, right? Naturally sourced fats, such as from squirrels or bears, will go bad much quicker before being rendered down. Rendering fat is merely a process of separating the fat from the extra bits, such as the connective tissues or leftover meat. Rendering fat will dramatically increase the amount of time you can keep it on the shelf, as well as making it easier to use while preparing food, and easier to store as well. So let us know any creative ways you know of finding or processing fat or storing fat that will help it last a lot longer, because as a community, we're smarter, we're better. As a collective of individuals, that's what I believe in. So guys, I appreciate you tuning in. I know this was a little bit long, but I think there was a lot of really highly valuable information there that many people are just not thinking about. And again, we're programmed to not think about this because, you know, everybody wants to kind of keep a certain physique, right? You don't want to get totally out of shape and be totally too fat and whatever, right? Although they talked about it a little bit in the article. If you took two people and it was just about surviving the longest amount of time, would the really fat person survive longer than the really lean person? The answer is yes. If there were no other factors to consider, if it was just someone sitting inside their house waiting to die, waiting to starve to death, the fat person is going to live a lot longer because they have that extra fat on their body to keep them alive for a lot longer. There was even a story they mentioned in there where one guy went like 360 something days without food, but he was like 300 or 400 pounds and he didn't die. And I don't know what the whole story, I'm going to have to read that later on the side, but that was a pretty wild sounding story. And I was like, okay, that kind of proves it right there. So when it comes to survival, you want to be in good shape, obviously, to be able to move around, but you don't want to be so lean and have such low body fat that this stuff will kick in a lot faster on you than it would on somebody that had a little more body fat. So hopefully I've given you guys something to chew on here. I'm glad you stopped by to chew the fat with me. Appreciate it. I stand for liberty. I hope you do too. Please stock up now. Learn about this stuff while the internet's out there and while you can. And share this information if you think it's valuable.